Imagine you are a teacher. You wake up in Mosul, you go to your classroom, you do your job every single day, but suddenly your paycheck just does not arrive. It is weeks late. Why? Because a maritime waterway, literally hundreds of miles away, is closed. Today is Thursday, August 13th, 2026. Welcome to the Claire and Horatio Daily World Brief. This briefing is available at claireandhoratio.com. We are examining a stack of global reports today that show what happens when the world's most critical choke points are abruptly squeezed shut.
The situation in Iraq really is the most urgent example of that. Following the U.S. and Israeli bombings of Iran back in late February this year, Iran retaliated by blocking the Strait of Hormuz. So you have this massive military and geopolitical standoff.
Which, on the ground in Iraq, translates instantly into a domestic financial crisis. Iraq is uniquely vulnerable here because between 80 and 90% of its oil shipments rely entirely on that specific strait.
By May, their seaborne crude exports had plummeted by 97%. And because the Iraqi state relies on oil for up to 90% of its national budget, the government's revenue has, effectively vanished.
They need up to $8.2 billion every single month just to cover public sector salaries, pensions, and social welfare. Right now, those revenues are hovering barely above $2 billion.
Which is a catastrophic shortfall. I mean, you would think a sovereign wealth fund provides a comfortable cushion, but burning through emergency reserves to pay for daily groceries is the ultimate red flag for state collapse.
Looking at the central bank figures, the government is publicly claiming they have $83 billion in reserves and gold holdings. If they have that much cash sitting there, international lenders still panic when a state liquidates foreign reserves just to pay a teacher in Mosul.
Absolutely, because those reserves are designed to stabilize the national currency and back long-term infrastructure, not to act as a payroll account for two-thirds of the working-age population.
Yeah.
When they tap into that, inflation spikes and the purchasing power of whatever money the state does hand out evaporates.
Mahmoud Walid, a 38-year-old teacher in Mosul, told reporters about the creeping anxiety of hoarding physical cash for emergencies as these delays stretch on. Medical professionals are hearing directly from the Ministry of Health that the cash flow simply does not exist.
We are seeing the government attempt these desperate workarounds, too. Reviving a long-shuttered pipeline to Lebanon, trying to truck oil to Syrian ports, even asking Iranian officials for a special dispensation to pass through the strait.
Those are marginal fixes to a colossal deficit. The mechanics of global oil transport simply do not allow a country to replace supertankers with a fleet of trucks.
Not even close. A single, very large crude carrier moving through the strait holds about 2 million barrels of oil. You would need tens of thousands of heavy trucks running continuously across desert borders every single day to match a fraction of that volume. The infrastructure just does not exist.
The regional implications of a destabilized Iraq are massive. We have already seen small demonstrations from university staff and Ministry of Electricity employees. Haider al-Shakari, a research fellow at Chatham House, notes that the government has built up security mechanisms to contain isolated protests.
But if salary delays merge with the existing electricity shortages and rising inflation, the pressure could easily spark a return to the massive nationwide protests we saw between 2019 and 2021.
The tragedy of the Iraqi economy is that it only ever entertains genuine reform when fiscal crises force its hand. The entire nation is held hostage to a single commodity moving through a single geographic choke point.
And when the oil money is flowing, the political incentive to combat corruption or expand the private sector completely evaporates.
Whether you are looking at the Strait of Hormuz in the Middle East or the major rivers in Europe, we are seeing the exact same vulnerability. We have reliance on a single, fragile choke point. In Europe, that choke point isn't being squeezed by a military standoff, but by the climate.
Romania is dealing with this right now. They have been forced to shut down the Cernavodă nuclear plant, which typically supplies 20% of the nation's electricity.
Because the water levels in the Danube River have fallen too low to allow the suction nozzles to take in cooling water.
Right. The physical mechanics of a nuclear plant make it highly dependent on its immediate environment. These plants are essentially massive steam engines. They require a constant, massive intake of cold river water to cool the reactors.
The Danube has fallen to its lowest level in 30 years during this prolonged heat wave. When the water drops physically below the plant's suction pipes and those pipes suck air instead of water, the plant has to shut down to prevent a meltdown.
which instantly wipes out a fifth of the country's power grid during a period of peak air conditioning demand.
Oh,
We are really watching 20th century energy and transport networks failing under the conditions of a rapidly warming 21st century.
Europe is currently the fastest warming continent, heating up twice as fast as the global average. And this is breaking commercial logistics. In Germany, the Rhine River has dropped to just 12 centimeters at the Kaub choke point near Koblenz.
When the water drops to 12 centimeters, it is not just that ships have to move slower. Heavy commercial barges literally scrape the riverbed. Companies are forced to load their ships at only 10% capacity just to keep them buoyant enough to pass.
The steel giant ThyssenKrupp in Duisburg is scrambling to secure rail and truck alternatives just to keep their coal furnaces running. Relying on road networks to transport heavy, bulky coal is highly cost inefficient, and there simply aren't enough trains or truck drivers available to replace the volume of the river.
And that fundamentally breaks the supply chain. The agricultural sector is taking a devastating hit as well. The German Raiffeisen Association reports over 3 million metric tons of grain and rapeseed lost to the drought since mid-June.
Amounting to nearly $692 million in economic damage. In Italy, trade associations estimate climate-related damage from drought and wildfires could exceed $3.5 billion. But beyond the staggering economic damage, the human toll is what truly demands attention.
Think about the civic infrastructure that is supposed to protect your grandparents. The Robert Koch Institute released a conservative estimate that 12,500 people have died prematurely due to heat in Germany so far this year.
The vast majority of those fatalities are individuals over the age of 75. The states of Saarland and Rhineland-Palatinate are seeing double the national average of heat-related deaths.
Those fatalities reflect a society that was never designed to protect vulnerable populations from sustained extreme temperatures. When rivers dry up, the capacity to move heavy raw materials vanishes, agricultural yields collapse, and the baseline temperature becomes lethal for the elderly.
The Dutch bank Triodos has warned that this extreme heat could wipe out much of the projected economic growth for the entire European Union this year. The physical geography of the continent is changing faster than the institutions governing it can adapt.
Which is a terrifying gap between the reality of the climate and the speed of our governance.
For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinoratio.com. While physical infrastructure degrades in Europe, the sources we are tracking show aggressive alterations to civic infrastructure in Washington, D.C. The Trump administration has moved to systematically dismantle the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau.
We saw Stephen Wheeler, a data scientist and the agency's union organizing chair, placed on administrative leave earlier this month without a stated scope for the investigation.
Another worker, Alexis Goldstein, was fired after she questioned the credentials of Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency staff. Those staff members were accessing sensitive American financial data and trade secrets without required training.
Shutting down the operational capacity of the CFPB removes a primary layer of oversight on corporate financial practices. I mean, they deleted nearly 4,000 web pages and halted most work earlier this year.
Historically, this agency returned nearly $3 to consumers for every dollar spent on its budget, reimbursing at least $21 billion to scam consumers since its inception.
The critics in our sources point out a glaring contrast here. The administration is weakening labor organizers and stripping away consumer watchdogs, while simultaneously utilizing the office of the presidency to generate immense personal wealth.
In 2025, Donald Trump earned a reported $2.2 billion, driven heavily by cryptocurrency ventures. His company, World Liberty Financial, brought in $799 million, despite his own warnings back in 2021 that crypto was a scam.
He also earned $636 million from a novelty meme coin marketed just days before his inauguration. The financial analysts we are looking at stress how closely presidential policy aligns with these private ventures.
World Liberty Financial was recently tapped to play a central role in a $2 billion investment by a UAE-backed fund into Binance, the world's largest crypto exchange. This specific deal materialized after Binance pleaded guilty to U.S. money laundering violations and after its founder received a presidential pardon.
Critics argue that regulatory laxness toward the crypto industry directly benefits the executive's personal financial interests, setting a deeply concerning precedent for the monetization of public policy.
Trump's Truth Social business is currently pushing a scheme that sells wealthy Wall Street investors early access to his market-moving posts for $100,000 a month through an API. If you are an institutional investor, you plug your algorithm into this API, you receive the president's post in milliseconds, and your computer executes a massive trade before a regular citizen even opens the app.
Observers argue that providing institutional investors high-speed access to official, non-public information fundamentally disadvantages everyday retail traders and normalizes public corruption.
The administration is also wielding federal power to protect domestic tech allies under the banner of national security. The Federal Communications Commission recently banned foreign-made, largely Chinese, humanoid, and four-legged robots, citing the risk of data collection and remote commandeering by malign actors.
The dual-use military potential of these machines is genuinely serious. Researchers have demonstrated security flaws allowing attackers to remotely hijack them. But critics in the AI sector argue this ban functions effectively as a protectionist shield.
Chinese firms accounted for 85% of humanoid robot deployments last year, mass-producing cheaper hardware. Blocking their entry buys crucial time for American companies like Tesla and Figure AI to catch up in the robotics race without facing budget-friendly foreign competition.
And depriving researchers of access to affordable testing platforms might actually slow U.S. artificial intelligence innovation down in the long run.
The mechanics of leveraging state power for wealth generation extend far beyond Washington and directly onto the global stage, where the war in Ukraine has forged grim economic lifelines for isolated autocracies. North Korea is currently experiencing an unprecedented economic boom, earning an estimated $14 billion by supplying Russia with munitions, ballistic missiles, and tens of thousands of troops.
South Korean intelligence reports that Kim Jong-un receives up to $10,000 for every North Korean soldier killed in action in regions like Kursk.
North Korea is essentially getting paid massive amounts of cash to be Moscow's primary weapons supplier, entirely bypassing the global financial system. The regime is utilizing this windfall to construct 40-story residential towers in Pyongyang shaped like intercontinental ballistic missiles.
While Kim Jong-un is importing luxury electric vehicles from China and opening massive beach resorts. That transactional alliance with Moscow allows Pyongyang to shed its international pariah status.
It is a direct barter system that makes Western banking sanctions completely irrelevant. Russia receives the artillery required to sustain its invasion, and North Korea receives crude oil, military technology, and hard currency in return.
The sheer influx of capital fundamentally alters the geopolitical economy of the region.
The visual prosperity in Pyongyang heavily masks the reality for ordinary North Koreans outside the capital, who continue to struggle with severe inflation and food insecurity. The regime's attempts to build modern factories in regional cities are failing because they lack the basic infrastructure for electricity and raw materials.
The human cost of this war economy is equally devastating inside Russia. Nobel laureate Dmitry Muratov recently detailed the scale of domestic repression required to sustain this conflict.
Muratov's data shows there are currently at least 1,500 political prisoners in Russia. That is 3 times the number documented during the late Soviet KGB era.
The Russian state's fear apparatus is targeting anyone who challenges the official narrative, declaring hundreds of opinion leaders as foreign agents or extremists.
Muratov highlighted the case of Pavel Kushner, a 39-year-old concert pianist who was arrested simply for posting anti-war videos. Kushner died in pretrial detention following a hunger strike.
His death is a stark indicator of how a regime equates any public dissent with existential treason in order to maintain its grip on power. The war has provided a convenient cover for the total eradication of independent civil society within Russia's borders, enforced by the Federal Security Service.
The urgency of protecting human life brings us to 2 final, distinct updates on global health and legal accountability that demand public attention today. The World Health Organization is warning that the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo is on track to be the deadliest in history.
This could potentially eclipse the 2014 to 2016 epidemic, which killed 11,000 people. Since February, the rare Bundibugyo strain has caused over 2,000 deaths.
There are currently no approved vaccines for this specific species of the virus, though clinical trials based on COVID-19 vaccine technology are finally beginning. The primary barrier to containing this virus is not purely medical. It is the mechanics of trying to practice epidemiology in a war zone.
Ongoing regional instability in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo means that health workers are only able to reach 30% of the known cases.
You cannot conduct contact tracing when the conflict zones are entirely inaccessible to international aid under heavy gunfire. A manageable outbreak is turning into an accelerating epidemic because a fractured security environment prevents basic medical intervention.
Shifting to legal accountability, Australian military whistleblower David McBride has just been released on parole to receive surgical treatment for lung cancer after serving 27 months in prison.
McBride is the former military lawyer who leaked the Afghan files to the national broadcaster, exposing widespread war crimes by elite Australian Special Air Service forces in Afghanistan. The moral paradox of McBride's situation is profound.
He was sentenced to over 5 years in prison for a gross breach of trust for leaking classified documents. Yet, those very documents ultimately triggered the landmark Brereton Report,
Which found credible evidence of 39 unlawful killings. A special watchdog was set up, resulting in murder charges against decorated soldiers like Ben Robert Smith.
The legal mechanics here are deeply contradictory. The state aggressively prosecuted the individual who exposed the crime, while relying directly on his disclosures to investigate the actual war criminals.
Critics point out this reveals how institutional secrecy is frequently valued over transparency. McBride's prosecution serves as a chilling deterrent. It signals to military personnel that exposing atrocities carries a heavier, more immediate penalty than the act of committing them.
You can find deeper context on the legal mechanics of whistleblower protections and the Espionage Act on Debate Candy.
Which brings us to the core pattern underlying all of these updates.
Looking across today's briefing, what stands out is how severely systems fail when power becomes overly consolidated and alternatives are eliminated. We see it in the physical choke point of the Strait of Hormuz dictating the survival of the Iraqi economy and the environmental limits of the Danube River halting European energy grids. We also see it in how autocracies trade the lives of their citizens for regime survival, completely insulating themselves from the poverty and repression they create. The centralization of authority consistently prioritizes the preservation of control over the stability of the broader public.
Consider how the vulnerabilities in our physical infrastructure directly mirror the fragilities in our civic institutions. When the safety valves are removed, whether that is a river drying up or a consumer protection agency being dismantled, the pressure has nowhere to go but out. For more daily briefings, brain candy explainers, and classic audiobooks, visit clarinhoratio.com.